Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name's Dan, this Exploder. I'm here with another episode just for you. I took a brief hiatus, a couple weeks. We had a show called Beans on Parade that happened at the Legacy Arts Building in Lima, Ohio, January 25th. Sold out show, headlined by Brian Kenny, featuring Dave Herron, including Jody McDermott, Kyle Honhorst, Buck Newman, and myself, and of course the Dead Dogs. It was a great show. We have a show coming up in March called Blackout Boxing at the Southside Spartans Gym in beautiful Lima, Ohio, where I currently live. So, needless to say, I've been really busy, so that's why I took a couple weeks off from this endeavor, as it were. And I will, at the end of the episode, I will have a new announcement for Exploder that's going to interest you. So stay tuned to find out what. And after a couple weeks off, you're thinking to yourself, what's this episode going to be about, Dan? I imagine that you think about things in your head about talking to me. I don't know why I think that. But yes, what is this episode going to be about? Well, in the past, I've looked at things like Ring of Honor, looked at in particular promotions like Ring of Honor, Ring of History episode. I've talked about ECW's lasting legacy after they had closed their doors. I even talked about AEW back when they were just starting out as a promotion. With that in mind, I want to talk about professional wrestling on a particular certain level, and I want to talk about a specific promotion, and in this case, it's Lucha Underground. Lucha Underground was a joint venture between Mark Burnett of Survivor fame and his company 1-3 Media, and they partnered with Robert Rodriguez's El Rey Network to launch a weekly hour-long television show in the United States. It was going to be Lucha Libre on national television in the United States, something that had been tried a couple times and went like a season. There was a AAA had a show for a CMLL. CMLL had a very short show for a very, very short time on MTV2. Didn't last. I think it got like a season or two, and that was it. This was going to be the first time since then, and even that was a couple years before this. The show was affiliated with AAA Wrestling in Mexico, one of the biggest promotions in Mexico, and would feature guys like Blue Demon Jr., Sexy Star, Phoenix, Drago, Pentagon Jr., later guys like Aerostar, and so on and so forth. In July 2014, the show was originally called Lucha Uprising, and then in August 2014, it was renamed to Lucha Underground. Now, this name is going to be very important, as basically the aesthetic of the show is based on this name. The show was taped in front of a live audience in Boyle Heights, California. The first episode was taped on September 6, 2014. That is actually a day before my birthday. Has nothing to do with anything, but I thought you'd like to know. The show premiered, the first season premiered on October 29, 2014. Now, this show was different in a lot of ways. The Lucha Underground was not a promotion, so to speak, so it wasn't like this was Lucha Underground Pro Wrestling or whatever the hell. It wasn't like that. This was Lucha Underground was a promotion. It was a TV show. It was based as such. Matches were shown in their entirety with no commercial breaks, which is completely different from pro wrestling. As we know, we ever see somebody go for a chin lock or a dive to the outside, we know a commercial's coming. These matches were played in their entirety with the exception of the Aztec Warfare matches, which would go entire episodes. So you have to get some commercials in there. So, you know. The show featured many AAA stars, but also a myriad of different American talents like John Morrison, who would be called Johnny Mundo. Mundo, of course, is Spanish for world because he needed a last name. Vampiro was originally one of the announcers, along with Matt Stryker. Conan, Jake Strong, who was formerly known as Jack Swagger, who is currently known as Jake Hager. A lot of names here. Jack Evans and Helico, which I believe this was Jack Evans' first national exposure since Wrestling Society X. Chavo Guerrero Jr., Brian Cage, Evilise from Tough Enough, Marty the Moth, who was another guy, Martin from Tough Enough, Joey Ryan pre-Dick Superpowers mode, and more. They also featured a commissioner-type character named Dario Cueto. Now, Dario Cueto is not a wrestling personality. He's actually a very well-respected and established actor named Luis Fernandez Gil. So it was very interesting because the fact that they would bring in this character, like now WWE's done it a couple times. I remember when they did the Truth Commission, the first guy was called the Commandant. Well, the Commandant was not a wrestling guy. He wasn't even a wrestling manager. He was a South African actor who they brought in to play this character. So it's not unheard of, but it's not as common. But Dario Cueto, to be fair, this guy played the role to the hilt, and he played this evil character who was plotting against the baby faces or the technicos. He's going to get technical about it, and he was working with the Rudos, and he always had his own little way of getting around things, the way he wanted to do things. He introduced the monster Matanza, which I'll get to what Matanza was, but yeah, it's very interesting. It's very important to the angle and how Dario Cueto was sort of in charge of that. Segments were shot backstage were not shot like wrestling segments. They weren't like, oh, here I'm in an interview with, so-and-so, and I'm going to beat this guy up. And then the guy jumps him. And It was shot a lot like, it's very cinematic, which I would expect from this. It was done like a movie, so it made Lucha Underground really stand out. Characters were a little over the top, even for wrestling, but it was also where if you'd see a character plotting against another character, this guy doesn't trust this guy, and this person's over here, and it was done cinematically to where you're not looking at a show where you think, okay, well, everyone's gonna see what's going on. You would see two characters plot against another character, and you got this cinematic feel like this third character is not involved. He's not in the room. He doesn't know what's going on. So it gave you more of a movie vibe. If you don't see them in the same frame, it's safe to assume they're not in the same room. Is that kind of feeling. I don't know. I'm not a big cinema guy. I'm not a huge like movie nerd, so I'm sure there's some kind of term for that. But basically, it's done very cinematically, and that's what made Lucha Underground stand out, among other things. The show also involved characters that were created exclusively for the show, which was a little different. You'd have established wrestlers who would then play other characters, so they wouldn't play themselves or a wrestling version of themselves. Matt Cross, who appeared on Tough Enough, is known as an indie guy, he was a Ring of Honor guy, always as Matt Cross. Well, he played the masked Son of Chaos, and it was explicitly. It wasn't Matt Cross wearing a mask, it was Son of Chaos. This was a explicit character. Ricochet did the same thing. He would be the masked Prince Puma, which was very important, and he won, the first title, and he, especially during that first season, was like one of the main focuses. He was one of the main baby faces of the promotion. But again, he wasn't Ricochet, he was Prince Puma. And then, of course, there was Dario Cueto's monster, Matanza, which, as Brian Alvarez found out during Wrestling Observer Live, translates to literally slaughter, which is pretty cool. And he was played by Olympic wrestler Jeff Cobb, who is a Olympic wrestler and a native Hawaiian. So what are you gonna do? The second season debuted in January 27, 2016, and after one episode aired, they announced they were renewed for season 3. So that's pretty good. On November 10th, 2017, it was announced that Lucha Underground was renewed for a 4th season that was set to premiere in 2018. In February 2018, two of the producers, Eric Van Wagenen, I'm probably getting that one wrong, and Krista Joseph. Now, an aside here, do you know who Krista Joseph is? He was a writer for WWE, but you may know him as a little different. He's Big Dick Johnson, the big fat oily guy who wore a Speedo and danced up on people, including Vince McMahon, which I'm sure that was very awkward, But again, it was probably Vince McMahon's idea as a confusing man. Yeah, that's him. That's Krista Joseph. He was one of the producers of the show and creative guy and did really well with it. They announced that the temple would move from Boyle Heights, which was called the Temple, to the Union Central Cold Storage, which would dub the Ice Temple in downtown Los Angeles. There were also other changes to that season: a lower budget, shorter taping schedule, and ultimately a shorter season. Season 4 only had 22 episodes, while Season 3 had 40. So they basically almost cut the season in half for Season 4. Cut the budget, cut the taping time, and gave you half the episodes. So this is the sign of things to come. No spoilers, but yeah. April 6, 2018, they held a joint show with Impact Wrestling on Twitch. Remember when Impact was on Twitch? Those were the days. And they announced on that show that Season 4 would debut on June 13th. After Season 4 ended, here's where the trouble began. In November of 2018, producers basically started openly saying that they doubting they'd see a Season 5. The first problem was completely out of their hands, and this happens sometimes. The El Rey Network named Mauricio Rios as the new Vice President of Programming and Acquisitions, and he replaced Dan Kozlowski, who was a big supporter of Lucha Underground as a show, and he was said to be the guy who kept Season 4 on the air with the budget and time restrictions kind of as a compromise. We'll put you on the air for Season 4, but we gotta cut some things down to make my bosses happy. Makes sense. The other problem was something that every promotion runs into eventually: talent. The fact is, while Lucha Underground had its run and it did very well for the short time it was around, things were turning. Gears were turning in professional wrestling that were completely out of their control. Lucha Underground was a television show, ultimately. They would tape for a period of weeks, and then they would air. They would air sometime later that year. It was done as a television show. But the thing was, a lot of the talents, including guys like Ricochet, who brought this up, they were bound by these contracts. So the contracts were, you film, and I remember Ricochet's deal was something to the effect of he couldn't sign with anyone else until his character, the contracted character Prince Puma, was no longer a character. So it's going to sound weird in a wrestling show, but basically they had the idea of characters where things a little over the top would happen. So characters would die. So Prince Puma or someone would die, and then the character, that was how the character, but basically whenever the character was written out of the show, then he was available, then Ricochet, the person, the wrestler, was able to sign with someone else. It was sort of weird. It was sort of a weird way they did it, but it was promotion. When you were paid per show, per appearance, and then you would go on in your life. And these contracts were very restrictive, and this is something that would eventually bite them on their ass. But also, when the season ended and season 4 aired, there was no promise of a season 5 at this point. Talent was able to go where they wanted. I mean, even were. And their contracts had already ended and things like that. So guys like Ricochet signed with WWE, Brian Cage, Sami Callihan, Johnny Mundo, and Willie Mack ended up in Impact at one point. Jack Evans, Angelico, Phoenix, Pentagon Jr., and even Jake Strong, aka Jake Hager, would eventually end up in AEW. Basically, most of the roster, if not all of the roster, were gone. They were gone working on other projects. They were signed onto other promotions who could pay them more money and had them themselves locked up in a contract. So they're saying basically, if they filmed a 5th season, A, they'd have to do it with a lower budget. B, they'd probably do it with a shorter schedule, fewer episodes, just like they did season 4, but they would have to basically reboot the whole thing and create a whole new roster, which is not desirable to anyone. And then even producers who wanted the show to continue to season 5, they admitted outright that it wasn't looking good. And they were right. In February 6, 2019, Jorge Luis Alcantar, who worked as King Cuerno for Lucha Underground, filed a lawsuit in California against the El Rey Network and the Baba G production company that was behind Lucha Underground. Basically, they said that they were illegally restricted from working elsewhere in their chosen profession because of the contract that Lucha Underground put them under. And again, this were really weird because they were a TV show, but they were also dealing with pro wrestlers. It's a little different when you're an actor and you're making consistent money on, it's one thing. And like if you're taping a TV show, as long as the other show or the movie doesn't conflict with the taping schedule of said TV show, you're allowed to do it. That's why, and I'm not going to get too far into this, but one of the actresses who is in Fresh Off the Boat, the one who plays the mother, I'm sorry her name evades me, she was able to go off when they weren't taping and go film a movie called Crazy Rich Asians. Those two were not in conflict. You can do both. This was a kind of contract where they were paid per episode, and they were restricted from working elsewhere while that character was active on their television show. So he said some of the Lucha Underground cast was only earned $4,000 a year from that show, but were also extremely restricted in where they could work elsewhere, which is disastrous. Could you imagine? I don't care what you do. Could you imagine only making $4,000 a year? I think I might have made that, maybe less, but I was also in college. But if you're an adult and you're trying to make money, you're going to have problems with that. You're going to have problems making very little money and still being restricted. They argued that these contracts were illegal in the state of California, which, to be fair, yeah. California is very, in a lot of ways, they're very pro-worker, and they're not so much on really restrictive contracts. So they were lucky that they were in California. But yeah, basically they said they violated these contracts violated state law, and this led to a class action suit. Basically labor violations. Ivelisse Velez, Joey Ryan, and Melissa Cervantes joined him on the class action lawsuit to invalidate their contract so that they could work elsewhere. It was, again, they were being restricted, and they were like, okay, I can't do this. I can't make money elsewhere because I made $4,000 to film one show 6 months ago. You know what I mean? It's kind of, I get that. And as of March 26, 2019, all lawsuits were settled, and the wrestlers were free from the Lucha Underground contracts. And then on top of that, the show wasn't renewed for season 5. I mean, that's just the facts. The machinations behind the scene at El Rey Network with the replacement of Kozlowski, who was sort of pushing for the show, but sort of within corporate terms. The contracts were being restricted. A lot of people were getting their contracts were up and they were going elsewhere. And then the fact was they weren't renewed. So the contract, they weren't renewed, and the count was going everywhere. As a matter of fact, their own Twitter hasn't posted since November 2019, and that was an advertisement for a AAA show in New York. So is Lucha Underground dead? Yes. Even according to producers who wanted to keep it going, it just wasn't possible. They lost pretty much all their roster to AEW or the WWE. The writers, production, and even their referees are gone. In a sense, Lucha Underground did a lot in a short period of time when it comes to wrestling. They were a good wrestling promotion. They were a good lucha promotion. They had a little bit of cinematic blend, and they put things together, but quite frankly, it was also done as a television program. That's why it wasn't a promotion. That's why they didn't tour. AEW tours. AEW does pay-per-views, but they do TV, and they do It's a promotion. Ring of Honor tours, ECW toured, WWE tours, This is set up more like Wrestling Society X, which was set as a TV show. And there's nothing wrong with TV shows. But when you blend that TV show and professional wrestling, what you end up with a promotion that isn't a promotion. You end up with a wrestling promotion that isn't a real promotion, and you end up with a TV show that features a lot of wrestling. And the problem is, when you do that, you have a TV show. It doesn't matter whether it's an action show or a comedy, it's a TV show. And like any TV show, you're one season away from being canceled. And ultimately, that's what happened. Lucha Underground was canceled. The machinations behind the scenes of the network, effectively, they didn't cancel them, they just never renewed them. But also the behind the scenes on the wrestling part. The guys were leaving, guys were done, and they were going to greener pastures. You know, you could make $1,000 an episode at Lucha Underground, or you can go to WWE and end up like a guy like Ricochet, who's on the main roster right now. Well, gee, what's the big choice there? You know, maybe we'll get one more season of Lucha Underground, and maybe I'll make $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, or I'll go to WWE and do a 10-year career, 15-year career, and make a bunch more money. Not a big choice there. Not a huge difference. I mean, who could choose otherwise? So that's what happened. Ultimately, Lucha Underground was a TV show that got canceled. It may have been a wrestling TV show. It may have been a good show. And it had a lot of, like I said, it had made, pardon the pun here, quite an impact in professional wrestling. But the problem is, ultimately, it was a TV show that got canceled. And it didn't really explode. There wasn't some huge blow up. There wasn't some, guys behind the scenes screwing each other over. There wasn't a big Monday Night War and they went bankrupt and WWE bought them and all that stuff. It was just a TV show that sort of made an impact very quickly and then sort of fizzled out. And there were different reasons for it. And like I said, that's why I wanted to do this episode. I wanted to look at why it sort of fizzled out, but it fizzled out. And while you can watch, for a long time, you could watch their first couple seasons on Netflix even. That's how big they were getting. But beyond that, it was a promotion that had its time, it had its fun, and built some stars and sort of created a TV show, which was the intent from day one. But all TV shows come to an end. And some shows get, some shows are cheers, and then some shows get a season or two, and some shows are lucky to get a season. So for a 4-season TV show that featured wrestling, Lucha Underground did pretty damn well. And the end result, you can't really complain. Guys came out of it, men and women came out of it, gone on to greener passion, done better things in professional wrestling. So if nothing else, it was a great promotion for its time. It created a great environment, a good TV show, people enjoyed, but it just wasn't meant to last long, and it didn't. And that's really, honestly, when it comes to that, I don't have any huge blockbusters. I don't have any huge complaints or rants or anything like that. Ultimately, that's what Lucha Underground was. It was a TV show that had its time, and then it finally got canceled, and that's where we are today. Well, that's going to do it for this time. Thank you for listening to another episode of Exploder. Like I said, I had an announcement. I've decided that with my other endeavors, through Drift Compatible, through ZTO, some live shows that you see on the ZTO network, including the Gromy Show and things like that, and including the boxing events, Blackout Boxing. Beans on Parade is ramping up and things like that. So what I've decided to do is that while I'm going to keep doing Exploder, I'm going to cut back production to every other week. So I'm not going to have a new episode every week. I'm going to have an episode every other week. And that's just something I have to do. I want to do this podcast and I like doing it. But with everything else going on promotion-wise, getting calls left and right, setting this up, it's just something that I had to do just for my own sanity. So if you like this show, if you're listening to this show, well, if you're listening, you obviously like it, hopefully. If you like this show, thank you. This will be, I'm going to do it every other week instead of just every week, so it gives you a little more time. It's also going to be a little easier on my producer Frank for the video episodes. There's not that big of a grind over getting the video episode out. So that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the same great show. It's just going to be on a little lighter schedule. You're going to have 2 episodes a month instead of 4, and I hope that that's okay. And if it's not, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, so until then, my name's Dan. This is Exploder. Have a good one.
You are listening to a ZTO TV podcast. You can find all our shows on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcast entertainment simply by searching ZTO TV. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to rate and review because it really helps us out.